Gabrielle Chanel, also known as Coco Chanel, is an iconic woman who revolutionized the fashion industry as well as perfumes. I thought it's always interesting to hear the stories about how businesses came to be. That's something I love particularly. So I thought I would re-watch this video about the history of Chanel and see what you guys think. So you watch it along together. Make sure to share your thoughts on Chanel's history in the comments down below. It's very interesting. She's more controversial than a lot of people will appreciate. She was a revolutionary, but also had some controversial ideas. So yes, you'll see what I mean in a second. Let's watch the video.
You know her as the embodiment of French high fashion, but Gabrielle Coco Chanel has more hidden in her past than she would have admitted during her lifetime. Her style and design put her at the very tip of Parisian culture, getting her in contact with the top echelon of the European elite. And yet, in spite of her associations with composers, movie stars, royalty and politicians, there is one connection that is often snubbed by the history books. In this video, we'll see how Coco Chanel built a fashion empire that she eventually tried to leverage in service of the Third Reich.
That's right, Coco Chanel supported the Nazis. In fairness, like a lot of other fashion houses, like Hugo Boss made the uniforms for the Nazi soldiers as well. Bear in mind, the reason why she was so revolutionary in her fashion back in the days was in the 1920s, women in France still used to wear corsets, which were very restricting. So Chanel brought the more modern style of, free-flowing dresses, unrestricted fashion for women, which of course is very liberating.
Coco Chanel was an innovative designer, with many contributions to the world of fashion and beyond. From popularizing the suntan as a mark, not of the working class, but of beauty and the aristocracy.
So that's quite dumb. I have to blame Chanel for that, for making everyone in Western culture now obsessed with having a suntan. As people said, as the commentator said, having a tan used to be associated with poverty. That meant you were out in the fields, working in farms, and you were always beaten down by the sun. It was actually better to be pale back in the olden days. Now, the issue with getting suntans artificially is people don't appreciate how deadly the sun is. Of course, as a doctor, I have to tell you guys, don't underestimate the sun. Make sure you have sunscreen on, because skin cancer is not a joke. You should not get tans recreationally, to be completely honest with you. You shouldn't do it.
Her beginnings, though, were quite humble. She was born in France in 1883 in poverty, and after the death of her mother at age 12, her father sent her to live in an orphanage for girls.
That is brutal, that she just lost her mother and her dad then, instead of looking after her, keeping her in their house, he sent her away to an orphanage. That is really interesting. Maybe I'm missing some details here, but she wasn't an orphan because her dad was the one who sent her there. That's brutal.
That's where she mastered sewing, and after aging out of the orphanage, she found work as a seamstress, while singing on the side for some extra cash. Now, Chanel was a smart woman, and she was born with pretty good looks, so considering her circumstances, it should come as no surprise that she found herself a wealthy patron very early on. Her charms captured the heart of a very rich man, Etienne Balsan, the heir to the largest textile company in France that, among other things, produced uniforms for the French army.
Now, in this upcoming section, you might say that Chanel was acting like a bit of a gold digger, which we would judge from today's standards, but bear in mind, she was in an orphanage, she grew up dirt poor, lost her mother at a young age, and also women didn't really have many rights. Women had minimal rights back then, and it was very difficult to go up in the ranks without using every advantage that you could. So, playing devil's advocate, what do you guys think?
French army. By 1906, when she was 23 years old, she had become his mistress, and through him, she began mingling with the upper class. 2 years later, Coco began an affair with one of Etienne's friends, an English aristocrat, and she would actually play them off of each other. They'd compete for her love by showering her with gifts and fulfilling her every wish.
What do you guys think of this? Do you think it was clever of her to be tactfully sleeping around in very precise ways? What do you guys think?
One of those wishes was to indulge Coco in her dream of opening a fashion boutique in Paris, which she did in 1910 thanks to funding from her wealthy lovers. Now, despite her patronage, Coco's success was a product of her own skill. Her hats and dresses brought with them a unique and alluring style that attracted socialites from across Europe. What truly kickstarted her global ascent, however, was Chanel's entry into the perfume business.
We all know the first classic perfume from Chanel. Say with me, guys, Chanel No. 5.
In 1921, Coco released her first fragrance, which you can probably recognize today, Chanel No. 5. Sold in a simple glass bottle, the perfume's success helped to further spread Chanel's fame across the world. But as her ambitions expanded, Coco ran into a problem. Selling fashion items and perfume in Paris was pretty straightforward, while selling them throughout Europe and North America was not.
And I can confirm that that issue still exists to this day. Oh my god. Trying to start off our own brand where I'm getting it out to you guys in different regions in the world. Shipping perfume, flammable items internationally is an absolute pain. And actually our EU shipping to the European Union ever since Brexit just fell through. It's very difficult. And it seems like it's been that way since forever. So yeah.
The capital required to build a global supply chain and distribution network was beyond even the means of Coco's aristocratic friends, which is why she had no other choice but to turn to venture capital. Her connections did prove useful. She got in touch with Pierre Wertheimer, the owner of an international conglomerate.
If you guys know any venture capital sources for myself or Atrium Fragrance that is owned by international conglomerates, that would be great. Yeah, thanks guys.
That sold perfumes and cosmetics in America and Europe. He was exactly the man that Coco needed, and together they created Parfums Chanel, the company that would make Coco one of the richest women in the world within 10 years, even though she only owned 10% of the company.
Now, this is where a lot of controversy came in the comments about this video. So Chanel was still the richest woman in the world, but do you think it was fair that she only owned 10% of the Chanel perfume company? Some people were angry about this and thought that she got cheated, but others said, if she didn't have this international conglomerate connection to distribute it, she wouldn't be anywhere near as rich. So she had a smaller slice of the pie, but the pie was much bigger. So they think it actually was fair because it relied so much on distribution. What do you guys think? It's going to set up the future points in her life, actually, this whole 10% thing.
There was only one problem. Pierre was Jewish, and Coco was one of the most fervent anti-Semitists in Paris. At first, Coco was willing to put her prejudice on the side, since she needed Pierre's help to establish a global business. But once things got rolling, she increasingly started viewing him as a leech who was unjustly benefiting from her ideas.
Yeah, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Europe. It wasn't just France, guys, as we all appreciate history.
Her views on Jewish-owned businesses were becoming increasingly common during the 1930s, especially after Hitler's rise to power in Germany in 1933. Coco's chance for revenge against Pierre would take another 7 years to emerge.
Imagine that, trying to plot your revenge 7 years in advance and just having a watch on the political landscape. That's a little bit crazy. I don't know, I'm getting some crazy vibes here, guys.
In the wake of the German Blitzkrieg and the rapid defeat of France, Coco saw an opportunity. On June the 14th, German forces entered Paris, taking control of the city. Coco closed her stores, putting 4,000 women out of work in the process, and moved in at the Hotel Ritz. Officially, she declared that now was not the time for fashion, but her move had different motives. The Hotel Ritz was the headquarters for many high-ranking German officials in occupied France. It was here that Chanel would first meet Baron Hans-Günther von Dinklage, personally appointed as a special attaché by Joseph Goebbels. In other words, he was a German spy. Chanel quickly fell in love with Dinklage and
yeah, I don't know, fell in love. She seems to be officially falling in love very often here in this video.
The two of them remained together for many years after the war. His associations with the Abwehr, the German intelligence service introduced Chanel to the Nazi war efforts. In 1941, she officially joined the German cause to aid in their wartime plan. She became Agent F7124 with the codename Westminster, based on her previous relationship with the Duke of Westminster.
So yeah, guys, she basically ended up being a spy for the Nazis in the 1940s. What do you guys think? Does this change your view on Coco Chanel?
From 1941 on, Chanel was deployed to Madrid to connect with Allied personnel under the guise of business plans. Of course, Coco wasn't helping the Nazis out of the kindness of her heart. She was hoping they would restore her full ownership in Parfums Chanel under their policy of Aryanization. Unluckily for her, Pierre was smart. He had seen the writing on the wall and had given control of the company to a Christian friend of his, before promptly fleeing to America. For several years, Coco would try reclaiming her business by collecting intelligence from the Nazis, but ultimately her efforts were in vain. By 1944, it had become clear that the tide of war was turning in favor of the Allies. In a last-ditch effort, Chanel was tasked by Heinrich Himmler himself to negotiate a surrender to the Allies, when Stalin's resurgent Red Army seemed all but certain to make its way to Berlin. Her mission was ultimately a failure, and by the time Paris had been liberated...
That's quite a shock, actually. That's a really big task that Chanel actually had, which is crazy. I didn't realize that she was given the task of trying to get a favorable surrender for Germany, but obviously at that point, Germany was done. The Nazis were done at that point. So yeah, it does lower my view of her a bit. I'll leave it to you guys. So she really did some dastardly stuff. She carried out some bad shit. She tried to really betray her business partner. So let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Coco had fled to Switzerland with Baron Dinklage. Now, after the French liberation, 10,000 Parisians were tried for treason. Chanel was not one of them, having only been questioned and then released due to a lack of evidence.
Basically, if you're rich, you can get away with everything.
It is rumored that Winston Churchill personally intervened to keep her safe, since she knew so much about the British elite and high-ranking politicians.
No comments.
After the war, Chanel tried suing Pierre in a last effort to reclaim her company. Ultimately, they came to an agreement, reducing her stake in the company to just 2% and merging the perfume business with the fashion business.
That seems like poetic justice, and karma got her back.
Pierre would cover all of Coco's expenses for the rest of her life, and he assisted her comeback to the fashion world a decade later in 1954. With her passing in 1971, the company became fully owned by the Wertheimers, and to this day, it is owned by Pierre's grandsons. At the end of the day, it is understandable why they chose not to publicize Coco's past.
So did you guys know that yeah, Chanel isn't owned by like the Chanel family or anything? I didn't really know this beforehand. Yeah, it's by Pierre's descendants, and that's fair enough. That's sweet poetic justice. And as they say, of course, they're not going to advertise that Chanel was a Nazi, because even though she did some terrible things, some underhanded things to him and his family, they still want to make money. So they're not going to tarnish the brand name at that point. I think they're going to just emphasize how she helped the fashion industry and how revolutionary her perfumes were, because that benefits them in the end. And it sounds like they've sort of forgiven her at the end.
It would have almost certainly destroyed her brand and harmed their profits, with little to gain if people knew of her work as a spy. Learning about the world of espionage during World War II might not benefit the Wertheimers, but it's certainly gonna be entertaining.
So what do you think, guys? What are your thoughts on this video? I thought it was fascinating, and just goes to show that you should never meet your heroes, because you will find out how flawed they are. We're all flawed, but I'm not sure if most of us would become Nazi supporters. But hey, there we go. That's history for you. What do you guys think of Chanel and the brand after finding out the reality of things. It's always interesting to go past the marketing and just see reality for what it is. I thought it was a really interesting video, guys. Let us know your comments and your thoughts down below. And make sure to check out our other reaction video where I talk about how perfumers in India make some of the best perfumes in the world. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye.